Welcome to your Healing Place podcast with Linda and Mindy. It is our desire to address common concerns of how abortion and faith intersect in order to validate the emotional pain and grief that abortion can bring and give hope that recovery is possible. So, Linda, I'd like us to talk a little bit about how we knew we needed healing. The group that we do, Forgiven and Set Free, the study that we do, that's the first chapter in the study. And I know all studies are a little bit different and yet very much the same. So sometimes a little bit different focus. But I know that's the first in ours. And I know that can be a really hard chapter for people. But I think it would be good for us to talk just our personal stories of how we knew we needed healing. So I kind of want to give the floor to you for a minute and how that came about.
Well, my abortion was a saline abortion, second trimester. I was a college student. Um, I was extremely traumatized, and so I went into the whole self-destructive, dropped out of college, which was the whole reason I had the abortion, is to not have to drop out of college.
Mm,
Um, Went to the drugs and the alcohol and the promiscuity, and ended up living on, but basically on the street, well, with friends, but just
mhm,
lost everything. And so at that stage, I knew I needed healing because I was going downhill fast.
mm,
And that's where I turned back to God. And so it was very, very obvious to me. I was having nightmares, haunting nightmares of
mm,
hearing my baby cry and can't find it.
mm,
So I was a mess. And God took me back in, and put a lot of my life back together. But and he dealt while I was at Bible school with the issue of forgiveness. But I had not gone at all. Now this is still late 70s, early 80s,
mm,
late 70s actually, yes. And I had not gone at all towards the grief component. It had all
mm,
been the guilt component, and I was good. I knew I was forgiven. I was going forward. I
mhm,
ended up being director of a pregnancy center, had never addressed that
mm,
the life of that child, never really acknowledged that well, I knew it was a life. I had not internalized that that was my child
mm,
in any way. So I was already directing a little pregnancy center back in the early 80s. Um, and thought I was all good and golden and everything was wonderful, and I was doing this ministry for the Lord. Um, and I went to a pro-life service where somebody was giving a testimony. We know testimonies are powerful. And I just started crying and couldn't stop,
mm.
and realized that I had never acknowledged that life as my son, and I never grieved for him.
Wow.
And they were in Chattanooga at the time. We had a service where they had a lot of speakers, and they had a row of hearses. And it was a huge funeral procession, hundreds of cars all the way through the city. And they ended up in front of the abortion clinic.
Mm,
And they had everybody that had um, lost a child to abortion take a rose and go and lay it in front of the abortion clinic.
mm.
And I was dressed in black, and I followed that hearse. And that was my initial funeral for my child. And I realized that I had never grieved. So I knew I needed healing. I knew that there was still pain there, and ended up going through a Bible study support group and found the healing that I needed. And then I was able to minister out of a place of wholeness instead of out of a place of pain.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you said you took care of the grief component, but not, or sorry, let me back up. You took care
The
of the
guilt,
guilt component, but not the
right?
grief component. And I never really separated those out like that, but that's true because forgiveness and healing are often two separate things.
Yeah.
And
And so
how
many
many,
Christian women have not dealt
that's
with that
right.
yet. Mm.
They have not because they're
And
like, I
that's why it
forgive.
still hurts.
Yeah, I forgive him, but I don't want to touch this. Like, I don't need to talk about it
Right.
anymore, But then this is not what this segment is about, so I'm not going to go down that road. Um, I want to just share real quick how I knew I needed healing. And that I shared it, I briefly touched on it in a previous segment. I was already living a very bad lifestyle, very wild, very out of control lifestyle. There was a lot of things in my life to that point, to before the first abortion, that caused me damage and emotional pain. And I was acting out with alcohol, drugs, and sexual promiscuity and that kind of thing. But then the abortions just began to cement this in my mind that I was just really unworthy, that I had no value at all, and that all I could get was what I was getting. And so I just threw myself headlong into it. I kind of believed that lie and lived it. And it was after I got saved, and I can remember I would lay in my bed at night and I would hear, God can't love you because you killed his kids, and those people are not like you. They'll never understand you.
Mm,
When I got saved, that's what the enemy attacked me with, was my abortions, and not anything else. And there was a bunch of other else's in there. There was a bunch of other things. That was the thing the enemy came after me. I didn't understand spiritual warfare. I didn't have any context. I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't grow up around church people. I didn't have any context for anything. I mean, spiritual warfare, the idea that we had weapons were just way, way, way beyond my thinking and understanding. And so I left the church thinking, well, I'll just go back. If they're going to reject me, I'm going to act first and I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to what I know. And what I know is filthy and disgusting, but at least I'm familiar with it, and I know how it operates. But I was miserable. I had tasted that God was good. I had experienced just his beautiful, sweet grace and his power and his
mm,
might. And I just thought, after a year, um, I moved because that was one of the things that I did to cope. I moved from one state to another and got back into church. And, you know, I was struggling inside and I was having nightmares. Now, I wasn't having nightmares about my baby. I was just having nightmares about these really grotesque things that I couldn't even put words to, but it was so horrific. And I, I didn't know what to do with it. Nobody knew how to help me. And when I did talk to people, they were like cringing. And so, again, when I heard about this thing called a pregnancy center, I thought, well, at least I could do something, right? At least I had all this stuff coming at me internally and I couldn't do anything about it, but maybe I could go do something for somebody else. And so I ran down to the pregnancy center and said, I just want to tell women not to have abortions. And she said, well, why don't you tell me why you're here? I said, sure. And I sat down and I told her my story from start to finish, probably the first time I'd ever done that. And I was a weeping, bawling mess.
mm.
And she said, I think you need to go through this abortion recovery healing Bible study. And it was forgiven and set free. And I was like, okay. And so I went through it and it was huge. I mean, I was such a new Christian. It was showing me the beautiful connection between the Old and the New Testament. You know, it was showing me how God viewed me, my abortion and sin, and
Mm.
himself, who he was. It was discipling me. It was beautiful. And that's how I started my healing journey. I needed continual healing, just this beautiful healing journey. And over the years, showing me that I needed additional healing. I needed additional things. So, and sometimes leading me there, not because I chose to go, but because of a different reason. And then finding out that there was a piece there that needed to be touched and healed. So, thank you for listening. This podcast was inspired by the many conversations had through the years with women struggling from the emotional pain associated with abortion. Thank you for allowing us into your healing journey. Subscribe on major platforms where podcasts can be heard. Learn more about virtual abortion recovery healing at www.anevenplace.com. The link is in the show notes.